Welcome to the preview call for Embodied Service, the Embodied Service Mentorship. I'm very grateful to have you here, and I'm excited to talk about the mentorship, how I got going with it, what it is, what it isn't, and we'll stop. Well, it's a small group, so we'll probably stop several times for questions, and then I'll give you a little bit of a line out on Zoom. I have it set up so that you can unmute yourself, and so if you have a burning question or a comment, you can unmute yourself when you're wanting to ask me something. And hi, Angela, I see you. I just started the recording. We just got started, so you haven't missed anything of note at all yet. So, okay, so just a couple things about Zoom if you haven't used it before. I know some have. I don't know if everybody has. If you choose to be on video, because it's recorded, then your face will be on the recording. And so it's up to you if that's comfortable or not. And you're totally welcome to not be seen. You're totally welcome to be seen. Same thing if you decide to ask a question or comment, your voice will be on the recording. So I just want you to know that going in, and that it'll be the same way through all the classes. And other than that about Zoom, I think it's fairly straightforward. If you have a question, you can either, as I say, unmute yourself and ask, or you can also type it into the chat box if you're online. If you're on the phone, I don't think there's any kind of option like that. And I may or may not get to the chats right away, just because I know they'll interrupt my train of thought. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about, well, I guess I'd like to tell you a little bit about me and my story, and then talk to you about why I decided to do this particular course. And I just need to do one more thing with the screen. And I'm not sure I can. All right. So I had a corporate career until 2010. I was an employee communications and corporate communications director. Hung out with the executive team, and the last job I had, I was responsible for sort of strategic communication, a little bit of strategic planning, all those kinds of corporate things. And for most of my career, I loved it. And I did well because I was, quite honestly, because I was really good at being one of the guys. And that was kind of how I grew up. Two brothers. I grew up in the military. And when I finally realized that I couldn't keep it up, and it was just like a very deep internal knowing that it was time to go, I quit, and hadn't intended to quit exactly the way I did, but when I met with my boss, who was the owner of the company, the words that came out of my mouth were basically about quitting rather than seeing if I could downsize my job or something like that. So it was very interesting that I spoke the truth without really meaning to, actually. And then after I left, I went to India a couple of times. I got a second yoga teacher certification, a 500-hour. Spent some time deeply immersed in Ayurveda in India and in Portland. And just the further I got out of the corporate world, the more I realized I couldn't go back into it. And I had friends sending me job ideas, and I just couldn't make myself apply for any of them, even though I knew that I couldn't live on my savings forever either. I started doing consultations, Ayurvedic consultations, and essentially it took me 6 or 7 years of scrambling around trying to sort out what I wanted to do to settle on astrology, which came out of nowhere, and Ayurveda, and sort of blending all these nature-based systems to help people get back to themselves. And just a little bit about my motivation is that at some point I realized, looking around me and seeing kind of both the good and the bad in the world, going through some very shadowy periods myself, I realized that what is more important to me than almost anything else is helping people reconnect with themselves and, if you will, live from the inside out, live from their own intuition, their own souls, and as part of that, reconnect with their bodies and with the planet. And so a lot of what this mentorship was born from is realizing that the corporate world, the business world, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, and most, if a high proportion of even the people that purport to blend soul and spirituality into business, in my view, are still perpetuating the old business models that are highly patriarchal and highly focused on the masculine energy that our country runs on, and indeed much of our world. And we've got several thousand years of that being the pattern, so a lot of us, even if we want to be different, don't know how. And for me, the realization came both suddenly and slowly. The original realization was basically waking up in the middle of the night, realizing I knew how to succeed as a man. I did not know how to succeed as a woman. And then the last few years have been learning that. I've been fortunate to have some amazing teachers and mentors. Emily Trinkus, the astrologer that I've learned from, is one of them. She specifically teaches astrology that's more, that's got more feminine flow to it, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then Sarah Beek is somebody that I can highly recommend, and she essentially helps people reconnect with their souls, which, just a minute about that, because it's an important piece of this program too, is that most of what we talk about and learn about in the spiritual world is spirit in terms of what's outside of us. Spirit meaning source outside of us, like the one, which is certainly we're part of it, it's part of us, but there seems to be more of an emphasis on that transcendence and looking out and up. Whereas when I talk about soul, what I'm talking about is looking down and in and learning and feeling what's really me and what's my inner divine, if you will, and how is that making decisions, how is that driving, and learning to live from there. And my conviction and my understanding, if you will, is that it's that connection with our deep true selves that's really been lost in both the spiritual world and the business world. And that until we can get back to our bodies and get back to the earth and get back to that rootedness, we're going to keep going the way we're going in this world, which is, again, there's beauty in it, but there's also a lot of destructiveness. So that's my sort of high-minded, if you will, motivation for doing this is to help people reconnect on a very visceral level with themselves. And at some point, we'll do a little meditation, and I'll try to give you a taste of what that feels like, at least from my perspective. Couple other things. When I talk, I do want to talk about definitions for a minute. When I talk about feminine and masculine, what I'm talking about is an archetypal view of those things. I'm not talking about men and women. We all contain masculine and feminine energies. Masculine energy, if you want to think about it in astrological terms, you can think about it in terms of Aries and Mars and a little bit Saturn. It's very much, in Ayurveda, we would call it the penetrating energy. It's the directing energy, the forward-moving energy, the energy of action and will, and that desire of going out and getting something done. Feminine energy would be more, and let me just go back up. Masculine energy is usually associated with the elements of air and fire. So also very intellectual and also creative in one sense of the word of creative. Feminine energy associated with water and earth energies, very much rooted, grounded, more relational, more about flow. Water element is what gives us the flow in our lives and connection. And in practical terms, feminine energy is more receptive, has, I hate to use the word passive because, again, in our society, it's a little bit tainted. And I don't mean passive as in sits around and waits for life to happen, but passive as in not the driving force, but more the allowing force. You've got to have both, right? The feminine and masculine are two sides of the same coin. So when I talk about feminine and masculine, that's what I'm talking about. And then a couple more things about just astrology and Ayurveda and yoga. Those were the underpinnings of the mentorship as I've mentioned them. And to me, they're all ways of relating to the natural world, including the spiritual world. To me, they're not separate. So astrology is, it's a language. It's really a language of the universe and the cycles and rhythms in the universe. And when I talk about astrology in this class, what I mean by that is cosmic timing and context. So for instance, I'll talk a little bit about the full moon that was just last night, the Aries full moon, and we'll talk about how that moon, the energy around this moon just gives us context for what themes might be up, what we're supported in looking at in our lives and in ourselves. And so that's what the astrology will do for us, is give us a little bit of context, some words, some themes. It'll guide us in terms of what practices are we going to do when, what things are we going to examine and when. And then the Ayurveda, if you don't know it, it's the sister science to yoga. It's the health, in a way, it's the health science in yoga, health science from India. But the purpose of Ayurveda is to connect the soul to the body through the senses, to deepen that connection between the spiritual world and the physical world. Because, again, many of us get those as separated. And Ayurveda helps us kind of connect to nature and connect to natural cycles through practices that, mostly lifestyle practices of like eating with the seasons, getting up and going to bed with the sun. We'll talk about those kinds of things in relation to self-care and also in relation to when to work hard, when to back off. Again, sort of tied in with astrology. I'm using the lunar cycles in this class because I think the lunar cycles are just really excellent regular timing. So at new moons, we can take on new things, right? They're initiations. They're the time for looking at new themes and maybe setting intentions. The full moons are when those intentions come to fruition, and it's sort of the time to maybe make the last push on the important things, and then also start to release things that aren't flowing, if you will. So that's the purpose of the moon cycles, and aligning our calls with the lunar cycles. And what I'm planning is that at least at one of the full moons, we're going to have another healer join us to help us work through some of the more deep stories, the more deeply seated stories that we all have been programmed with. Maybe we have them to different degrees, but they're sort of the ocean we're swimming in, if you will, in this country. Let's see. Let me just pause for a moment and see if anybody has questions about just that little bit of background in terms of the use of astrology and Ayurveda and yoga. And then I'll give you a little bit more about some of the themes we'll talk about in the course, and then we'll go into some of the current astrology. So again, you can unmute yourself, or if you're on video, you can wave at me. Okay, let's see. In the chat, all sounds good, no questions. Okay. All right, well then we'll keep going. All right, so just a couple of things I want to just put in front of us in terms of the nuts and bolts. One of the main things that I've discovered through my 7 years of being out of corporate world is that I didn't even really know what was driving me for so much of my life because it was invisible. For instance, I remember having a conference once. I worked in the forest products industry, so you can imagine that that's a little bit more masculine than maybe some other industries. But I think most of what we see, you'd see that there are some similarities throughout. And for instance, we did a whole conference once around the theme of get her done. That is, in a lot of ways, what underpins American business and American work, how we work in this world, is that we think that it's up to us to get it done. We think that it's our hard work that produces results. And we think that if we work harder, we will get more done. Even the work smarter, not harder move sometimes buys into that way of thinking. And to wrap in more of the feminine energy and come back into balance, we have to allow ourselves to rest, particularly as women. And what we haven't had validated for us typically is that the world of work is so rooted in masculine values like hard work that we don't even see that that's an imbalance. And to tie it back to the body, there's women come to our energy through rest. That's where we get creative energy from. That's how we get new ideas. That's how we get to understand what we need to create, is by allowing ourselves to rest. It's why meditation is such a powerful practice. Men, on the other hand, typically get their creative energy and their energy in general through action. And I think many of us that are married or have been married or been in relationships with men have seen that in just how we operate, is that the man will often want to do more, even at the end of a long day or a long week, and the woman, at least in my case, just doesn't have the energy for that, doesn't want to put out that kind of energy. And again, we have an entire world that is structured around just push through, right? How many times have we been talked about leaning in and pushing through and breaking through resistance? All of that, if you can get a feel for that kind of energy, breaking through, pushing through, that's all a very masculine energy, right? Penetrating, driven. You can think of a knife cutting through something. That's all masculine. Whereas the whole concept of sitting quietly, maybe even staring out the window or taking a slow walk in nature, that feels like slacking off, taking a break. It feels unproductive. Productivity and what's productive is another one of the myths, the unbalanced myths that's been perpetuated in the way we work in this culture. But that rest time, that quiet time, that slow time is critical to our ability to create. So that's an example of something that we'll talk more about and work through more in the program. Other things, there's a lot about authority it's a personal path for me, but it's also something, again, that's cultural, is that whole idea of owning our own authority and learning to be our own authority. Where are we looking outside ourselves for guidance rather than recognizing that the guidance is right here all the time? Even if we're using a pendulum, the guidance is coming from within. It's just that the pendulum is helping to translate it for us. And the same thing with astrology. Astrology is not a substitute for our own wisdom. Astrology is giving us language to help us listen to ourselves in a different way. All oracles operate the same way if they're operating in that sort of from that soul perspective, rather than looking for an outer guru or an outer answer. And so that's another piece, that whole theory, or that whole rather practice and understanding of autonomy and authority and sovereignty, and what does that mean, and what keeps us from owning it. What do we need to do in order to learn to trust ourselves? And that's another theme that will be sort of front and center in the whole program, is self-trust. And quite honestly, that's been one of the most challenging pieces for me, is to trust that the things that even the things that look like mistakes, quote unquote, are right, in a sense that they're proper, they're in their proper place, and they're in the proper timing. So in other words, even if I think, oh my gosh, I should have done this faster. Of course, the should word is the first clue, right? That we're out of our own authority, out of our own desire. But it's that even if I have that sense that maybe I could have done it differently, what I'm learning is to trust that I did it exactly the way I needed to do it, given what was going on at the time. And that, I find that extremely hard, but I also think that's one of the more central tenets of learning to serve. What we're talking about is service, real service here. And service has to come from within. So those are the self-worth, talking about money, again, learning how to see all these things in a different way, with a slightly different perspective, with a more balanced perspective. That's what this is about. If you noticed in my description of the class, I made it very clear that I'm not about helping us get six-figure incomes. I'm not against six-figure incomes by any stretch. But I think the moment that we put that ahead of true service, then we're no longer operating from the soul, because the soul doesn't care about six-figure incomes. That's not what the soul is here for. A lot of this is figuring out, why are we here? And we can do our soul work working in a laundromat. So we can do our soul work and working in another big corporation. The soul work doesn't have to be some special spiritual work. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's more the how than the what, as is the case with so many things that we do. I will be sending out a reading list, just some ideas, not requirements by any stretch, but just some ideas about books to read. And Sarah Beek will be on that list. Marion Woodman, the Jungian therapist who passed not too long ago, who did so much work around the divine feminine. There's a few others that will be on that list, just ideas of people to connect with through their books. And just looking at my notes. And then the other piece that I think that could be critical to this program is partnering with somebody. It's one of the things that I've found useful in the past, is that going it alone is not really it's not really useful for a lot of us. And it's not, a lot of times people talk about it in terms of accountability, and I've heard them called accountability partners. But for me, it's less about accountability and more about connection and support and holding space for each other and honoring each other. And so the concept is that we'll pair people up in the program and then offer homework assignments so that people can work together on them, whether they're clearing exercises or meditation exercises or something else, or even self-care routines. Sometimes it helps to have a buddy just to share with them, well, this is working for me or this isn't working for me. Thanks, Angela. Great idea. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's the program that I went through a few years ago. It was immensely helpful to have those partners. So let's talk a little bit about just what's going on right now and what the themes are. I had originally hoped to start this program with the Virgo new moon because Virgo, the sign of the priestess, is so much about service, service and health, which go together so well with what the mentorship is about, is supporting ourselves through self-care, but also learning to serve, again, in that more balanced way. And what stopped me was all the retrograde energies of the summer. And I just simply couldn't get it together. I couldn't see how possibly to get the marketing started. The idea came to me in July, I think, and then it's morphed at least once since then. It's a lot longer story. But we are just coming out of a summer of a lot of retrograde energies. And what that means is that so many of the planets, including Mars, who goes retrograde fairly rarely, only every couple of years. And so the Martian retrograde is a little bit more powerful than something like Pluto that's going retrograde all the time. And Mars, as I said, is the planet of action and will and desire and getting things done and that whole masculine drive. And while it was retrograde, it was a good opportunity to sort of examine that energy in ourselves and maybe get a sense of what motivates us and get a sense of our own masculine energy. But it was also very hard to get forward traction. And then just as Mars was getting ready to go direct, then Mercury went retrograde. Jupiter had been retrograde for a big part of the year, and Saturn. And Saturn just went direct again recently. And Saturn is the planet of structure and dedication and commitment and responsibility and hard work. Saturn and Mars have some connections in that realm. And again, with all of them going backwards for so much of the summer, it was just very difficult to get that forward momentum. So that was what stopped me from starting at the Virgo new moon. So I started my marketing at the Virgo new moon. And again, just talking about it and getting it out. There are other themes for Virgo, but to me, that's some of the most important, is that whole concept of service. Virgo is also very much about discernment. And so I guess I discerned that it wasn't time to start yet. And so here we are at the Aries full moon. And again, Aries, that forward looking, or that forward movement, that forward acting planet. You can look back to April 15th, which was the date of the Aries new moon this year. And the new moons and full moons run both in monthly cycles and in 6-month cycles. So we're completing the 6-month cycle of Aries in a way. And if you think about that from a tropical astrology point of view, April 15th was essentially the beginning of the planting season, and that's the Aries new moon is beginning to put the seeds in the ground. Aries is that, actually it's even more than that. It's the seeds starting to come up through the earth. If you think about the energy of a seedling pushing up through the earth, again, it's that directive, that penetrating masculine energy. And that was the beginning of Aries season. And here we are at the time of final harvest, with the Aries full moon, and again, sort of reaping what we sowed in the springtime. And so that's what the energy is of this particular, well, just last night, this particular full moon, this harvest moon. And so we can think back to what have we harvested that we planted back in the spring to give us a sense of kind of one of the deeper meanings. But the other cycle that this Aries full moon represents is that Virgo new moon cycle. So again, at the new moon in Virgo, what was getting planted in terms of service and discernment. Virgo is also the sign of separating the wheat from the chaff. If you think about that grain harvest. And so at this full moon, what we started at the new moon is coming to fruition. And for me, it's very clear, right? It's the preview call for the beginning of this seed that I planted at the Virgo new moon for the mentorship. For others, it might be less clear, but for me, it's very visible. But there's a couple of other things to say about this particular time. And again, we're coming off all those retrograde energies, but to speak specifically about Mars, that we're getting a culmination of all that Mars retrograde energy from the summer. So all that, and that time of being able to look at the masculine energy, look at ourselves, what's motivating us, what are our true desires. This is with the configurations at the full moon yesterday, we're getting a little bit of a wrap up of that. So you can look back to, I think it was, I want to say late April or May when, got to think about it for a second. Sorry, I didn't write down the dates, or did I? We started in April or May with the Mars retro cycle, so you can kind of look at what was going on, what's gone on for you for the last few months with that inner masculine journey, looking within at the masculine energy, and see if there's anything that comes up for you around how you've acted and how you've followed what's your will and desire over the last couple of months. And the other thing, I want to say about the astrology of now is that we're just getting ready, and here's another major theme. We're just getting ready for Venus to go retrograde. So all these other planets have started going forward, and now we're in the shadow of, meaning we're within the piece of the zodiac in which Venus will travel as she goes backwards. So Venus actually starts to go backwards in early October, and October 6th, I think it is. And when Venus is backwards, then we get a chance to re-examine the feminine and our feminine energy and how we integrate all those feminine archetypal qualities that we talked about at the beginning of the call. And so that was the other big piece of the timing of this mentorship, is that we're just coming off Mars retrograde, but now for most of the mentorship, we'll either be in Venus retrograde. Actually, for the whole mentorship, we'll either be in Venus retrograde or Venus in the shadow of Venus retrograde. So a lot of the driving motivation here is giving ourselves that space to examine, what does it mean to incorporate feminine energy into how we operate? What does it mean to bring that feminine balance to the masculine that is so prevalent in society? And we're supported in doing that the next few months, because that's, with Venus going inward, it gives us that same chance to go inward and take a look at those questions. One of the questions that came to me today was, how does the feminine energy support the masculine energy? It's a little easier to see in a way how the masculine energy supports the feminine, but they work in tandem, and there's a way that the feminine supports the masculine. So that's a question we'll be exploring as well. Another piece of the current astrology is that Venus and Mars are squaring, meaning that they are in a dynamic angle with each other. Square means that it essentially looks like the corner of a square, a 90-degree angle between the two planets. And because it's not a flowing angle, right? Energy doesn't flow around that angle very easily. That means that they're kind of pushing on each other and asking each other to find ways to integrate. And we've had that going on several times this year, and it will be going on until March of next year. And so that's, again, another sort of driving force of behind the mentorship is how we can use the energies in the sky to help us learn to integrate that feminine and masculine. So what can we do with that tension between them within ourselves to bring greater balance and to drop into our soul's service, again, no matter what it is that we're doing. So again, I'm going to just take a breath and see if there's any questions or comments at this point. No news is good news, right? Okay, so what I'd like to do now, actually, is a little bit of a meditation to give you a taste of... Oh, thanks. Thanks, Angela. I'd like to do a little bit of a meditation to give you a taste of getting really grounded and feeling within for that balance. And we'll probably do a meditation in every class, maybe at the beginning, maybe in the middle. I may also offer some Reiki in the classes, whether it's as part of the meditation or separate. We'll end up seeing how it flows. So one more thing I want to say before we start the meditation is that, again, culturally, we're sort of used to having a specific outline, specific course objectives, and kind of knowing what we're going to learn in each class. And there's a little bit of that with the astrology, but there's not so much of that with the way the course is structured in general. And so my desire and my intention is to let some of this be a little bit more fluid, which is not to say that I don't have objectives for the mentorship, but it is to say that I'm not going to send out a detailed course outline. I started to put that together based on the moons and the lunar cycles and the astrology. And then I realized that was a little bit too rigid, and that was what I was trying to get away from. And that's not, for instance, how it's done in, if you went and studied at the feet of a guru in India, which is not something I'm recommending. It's not something I'm not recommending, but it's what you would find is that it's a much more fluid approach, because it's our westernized minds that want to have learning outcomes and standardized testing and all those kinds of things. And the way we'll be doing this course will not be in that structured, rigid manner. So, okay, so let's get to the meditation and see where we end up on the other side of that. So wherever you are, find a comfortable seat. If you're comfortable sitting, it doesn't matter if it's in a chair, on the floor, or in a car. It matters more that you're comfortable and that you have some sense of your contact with what's underneath you. It doesn't matter, again, what you're in, where you're sitting. Just start to get a sense of your body. So you can just start to bring your gaze down or your eyes closed and start to feel exactly what's happening. And not from a place of an observer, but from a place of being in the sensations in the body. See if you can really sink into how things feel. And again, without making any judgments or even describing them. Just feel the full weight of the body, the full substance of the body. There will be places that feel perhaps heavier or lighter than others. You might feel mobility or more rigidity in places. You might feel more fluid and more static, more warm or cold, warm or cool. These are all the properties, the qualities of the universe as described in Ayurveda, these pairs of opposites. And then start to bring attention into more of the lower part of your body. Bring your attention into your seat and your feet, your legs. Feel the parts of you that are actually in contact with something. And then feel that whatever you're in contact with is in contact with the earth. You might notice what's happening with the pelvic floor. Feel what's happening with your pelvic floor. This the triangular sling of muscles between pubic bone and seat bones. See if you can feel whether there's a tightness there or softness there. In a sense, that's where we open to the earth's energy. So again, remember that a lot of this is about connecting with the body, feeling, really feeling embodied. Feeling what it's like to be a body. And then feel that connection with the earth. See if you can get a real felt sense of the body reaching down to the earth and the earth reaching up to the body. Maybe get a sense of gravity holding you to the earth. Get a sense of, it's a form of love, right? Gravity is a form of love. So the earth supports us as our foundation, and the earth also holds us to her. And it can be, you can even find a sense of gratitude for that. But if nothing else, a sense of acknowledgement. And then there's a downward flow of energy in the body. It gets left behind sometimes in this country as we spend so much time up in our heads. So feel that downward flow. Feel the actual pulling down of the body into the earth. And then you can let the spine get nice and tall. Once we have the foundation established, the connection to the planet, the earth, then the upward energy can reach up from a place of stability. And then we can reach up through the crown of the head, through that nice tall spine, into the sky, towards the sun, towards the planets, the other planets, the cosmos. We're supported in both directions. And again, keep checking in with the pelvic floor and see if it can keep softening. At least if you're like me, there's a tendency for that place to tighten quickly and easily. Besides the fact that that's where a lot of our health problems and low back problems come from. Again, that's also how we cut ourselves off from the earth's energy. And then lastly, just bring your attention to your breath. Feel into the breath. Feel the breath in the belly. Rather than feeling it at the nostrils or the throat or even in the chest, see if you can feel the rise and fall of the breath, the ebb and flow of the breath all the way down in the belly. And say hello to the body that works so hard to be your existence on this earth. And you can bring the attention back into the room and into our conversation here. Open the eyes. I'm curious if anybody has an observation about that, if that's different than what you've done in the past, or not. Okay. So the other thing that we'll be working on through our meditations and through our practices, and one of the primary reasons for meditation, in my view, is to get a felt sense of what I feel like, who I am, how I feel. So that is a lot of what we'll do with the meditations, is get a sense of what do I feel like, so that I know when I'm acting from my own soul, my own intuition. Okay. Hi.
Oh, hi. I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself, so that's why I dialed back in. But I wanted to tell you that when you said that gravity is love and the way that Earth holds us to her, I have never thought about it that way. And that was incredibly beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad.
I have been deeply touched by that. Like I said, I had to hang up and call back just to tell you that. And the idea that, you know, our bodies carry us through this world, but when you've had experiences like we have in a very masculine world, your body, for a lot of women, our body is a threat to the men that we work with. So we do a lot of things to not be a body. And to reconnect with myself in that way, that it was also very moving.
Thank you for sharing that, Beth, because that is so true. At least it has been true for me in the past too, is that it's almost like we've had to separate from our bodies because, as you say, they're a threat to men, and also because, at least for me, it was a form of self-protection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And Angela says she loves what you said. Yeah. So I guess I want to find out if there are any questions. I've tried to give you a little bit of a taste of what we would be doing, all the parts and pieces. I'm intending for handouts on some of the practices, some clearing exercises, but really more of just sort of bringing up ways that we've separated from ourselves and learning to reintegrate with ourselves. And again, also learning about, we know the masculine way, although sometimes we can't see it because we're so in it. But the idea is to also help us learn what's the feminine counterpart, not to bash the masculine or to get rid of it, but to balance it. And again, it's all about really coming into the bodies and coming into our own souls. So I'm curious if there are questions, if you have questions about the program, how it would go, feedback. It'd be nice to just know if there's anything else I can touch on for you before we close in the next little while.
Hi, it's Beth again. So I was looking at the dates, and there are a few dates where I'll be traveling outside of the country, and I know that everything will be recorded and I'll be able to access it, but how would that sort of play out with the, paired mentorship component? my partner and I just sort of figure it out, because I'll have access to email and things. It'll just be, actually I have the trip of a lifetime coming up. And so it'll be 2 weeks in November. I'll be completely gone.
Well, I mean, you'll do what you can. If you're going to be completely gone, that's also, that's also a very Venusian feminine way of being sometimes too, right? Being completely out of touch. But in general,
right. I hope not to be completely out of touch. I hope to be able to have access by email and phone. I mean, I'm not going to be in a remote part of this world, but I also am sort of looking to check out a little bit during that time. But now I have this opportunity to work with you and these women. So.
Yeah. So the way it would work is that we'd put you in touch and then we'd leave it to you to schedule, but you'd have that whole 2 weeks in between the calls in order to find time together. And I'm not envisioning it would be more than an hour every 2 weeks. I mean, unless you've decided to spend more time together. And so it'd be some specific exercises and maybe check-ins, and you might even be able to negotiate doing some of it via email. But my hope is that you'd be able to connect with somebody at least on an occasional basis, essentially every couple of weeks, just to kind of stay together through it.
Right. Good. Okay. So we'll figure it out.
Right. Exactly.
It's flexible.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah. Other questions or thoughts about the program? And then the other thing is that I did expect that we'd have a Facebook group, just a little closed, well, probably be a secret Facebook group so that nobody else knows it exists, right? That we'd just be able to share experiences in. And the conversations in the Facebook group will help guide the program as well. If something needs extra attention and it's obvious from what the conversations are in the Facebook group, then we would spend more time on that. Trying to think what else in terms of just housekeeping. And that's, the sharing stories with each other, because at least all three of us on this call have had corporate experience, and so we're going to have some common ground. I'm not expecting that everybody would have corporate experience, but you never know. But it would be nice to be able to share those stories, because I think we, as women, we tend to get isolated in a lot of these business world settings. At least in my company, there were very few women in general, and there were very few women in management. And that's certainly, again, that's a little bit endemic. And so sharing some stories, and then bringing up other things that have challenged us. So that would be part of my vision for this as well. And then the Ayurveda, it'll probably just be woven in, like in these conversations about what do the elements represent and what are the qualities. I have some great handouts, and I can put those out as well. So that's what I'm thinking about for that piece. And then a lot of the self-care practices will come out of Ayurveda.
Well, I think it sounds lovely and powerful and empowering.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you want to share with anybody that would be interested, that would be useful. I'm not a great marketer. I would like to tell you I'm going to give you expert advice on marketing, but I will tell you how I muddled through to this point.
Excellent. Happy to share it with my network. Absolutely.
Great. Angela, any questions or thoughts from you at this point? No? Okay. Well, I think we're probably at the end of it. And then you can certainly ask me on Facebook or via email if anything else comes up, and then I'll put this recording out, and we'll plan to get started on October 9th. And I guess we'll just keep in touch. And you will get an email with a copy of the recording too, with a link to the recording. And I'll go ahead and send it out both video and audio. There's not that much on the video. You'll just see my face, and I think I'm the only face on here. So, but I'll send it out both ways just in case that's helpful. Okay, well, thank you.
Great, excellent.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Beth, and thanks for being here, Angela.
Great, thank you.
Yep, take care, and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.